Only we come to this point of view with very different assumptions than were held by people like Hegel or Berkeley or Bradley, great idealists of the European metaphysical tradition, and probably rather more akin to similar trends in Buddhist philosophy emerging from India about 400 AD. The difference of approach, the difference of the way in which today this thing arises, and the way in which it arose in the thought of a man like Bishop Berkeley, is that the new idealism has a kind of curiously physical basis. When one would argue, everything you know is in your mind, and the distance, the feeling of externality between you and other objects and people is also a content of consciousness, and therefore it's all your consciousness. This, of course, created all sorts of weird feelings. Are things there when I'm not witnessing them, or is there anybody else there? Or are you all my personal dream? And one has only to imagine a conference of such people, of solipsists, those who believe that they alone exist, arguing as to which one of them is really there, to make the whole idea rather laughable. And furthermore, there seemed to be no clarity in such philosophical thinking as to what the term mind or consciousness meant. Mind and soul and spirit were always vague and formless. And matter, by contrast, was very rugged, craggly. And how these two ever influenced each other, nobody ever could decide. Because all properly behaved ghosts walk straight through brick walls without disturbing either the bricks or the ghost.
I think that it makes us...
And so how can a mind incarnate in a material body move that body in any way? This was always a puzzle. So people began to think that the differentiation between mind and matter was of no use. Because actually what happens in making such a differentiation is that you impoverish both sides of it. It's the same way when you get a mystic who's not a bit of a sensualist, and a sensualist is no whit of a mystic. Such a sensualist is boring. Such a mystic is a fanatic. Too spiritual.
I remain human.
It's the same
Fortune favors the
when we divide the medical profession from the priesthood. Both are losers. Not just because they lose their so-called opposite half. But the problem is when you separate a doctor from a priest, you do more than create a specialization out of what was originally one field. You create two specializations. Because a priest-physician is more than a priest plus a physician. By having, as it were, the binocular vision from medicine and from religion, he just doesn't see two added areas. He sees the area in three dimensions as a result of this combination. Well, in a similar way, when we have the concepts of mind and matter working separately, both are impoverished. Mind becomes vague, kind of gas, psychic gas, and matter becomes mere stuff.
Don't worry, I'll leave the scraps. Those who oppose me will get.
And then furthermore, to observe something, either simply by looking at it, or more so by making experiments, by doing science on it, you alter what you're looking at. You cannot carry out an observation without in some way interfering with what you observe. It is this that we try when we're watching, say, the habits of birds, to be sure that the birds don't notice us, that we're watching. To watch something, it must not know you're looking. And of course, what you ultimately want to do is to be able to watch yourself without knowing that you're looking. Then you can really catch yourself not on your best behavior and see yourself as you really are. But this can never be done. And likewise, the physicist cannot simultaneously establish the position and the velocity of very minute particles or wavicles. And it's in part because the experiment of observing nuclear behavior alters and affects what you're looking at. This is one side of it. The inseparability of man and his world, which deflates the myth of the objective observer, standing aside and observing a world that is merely mechanical, a thing that operates like a machine out there. science of neurology. We understand so clearly now that the kind of world we see is relative to the structure of the sense organ. That, in other words, what used to be called the qualities of the external world, its qualities of weight or color, texture, and so on, are possessed by it only in relation to a perceiving organism. The very structure of our optical system confers light and color upon outside energy. And in this sense, then, especially if you want to read a very easily digestible account of this thing, you get the book by J.Z. Young called Doubt and Certainty in Science. But you see here, from a new basis altogether, we have a new answer to the old riddle. If a tree falls in the forest when nobody is listening, does it make a noise? The answer, in terms of modern science, is perfectly clear. That the falling tree creates vibrations in the air, and these become noise if and only if they relate to an eardrum and to an auditory nervous system. Just as in ordinary drums, however hard you hit, the drum will make no sound if it has no skin. Because sound is not something that exists in the external world. Sound is a relationship between vibrating air and certain kinds of biological organisms. And therefore it is these organisms which confer what we call sound upon a vibration which in an earless world would make no noise. Now you see, that is perfectly clear and straightforward. But now we can dare we take certain steps from that? Could we say, for example, that before any organisms existed, there was no world? And what we're talking about when we talk about a world prior to the existence of organisms is what is called an extrapolation. Let me explain extrapolation for a moment. Supposing you have a map of Kansas, and you want, from the evidence contained in the map, to guess at what kind of territory lies beyond its edges. Well, naturally, you will extend those straight line roads, off and off and off. That's the only basis you've got to go on. Nothing in the map of Kansas would warn you that a little way west you will encounter the Rocky Mountains. The roads will have to wiggle. And still less will warn you that you're going to encounter the Pacific Ocean way out beyond, where you can't build any roads. So naturally, you see, extrapolation, we extrapolate from what we know to the unknown. So one might say then, is the existence of a universe before there were any living organisms an extrapolation? All we are saying is this is how things would have been if we had been around. But we weren't, so it wasn't. That is a possible argument. Although in the climate of opinion today, it is one that is not fashionable. You must watch out above all for fashion in philosophy, fashion in science. There are completely irrational functions that govern what is or what is not a respectable scientific opinion. And although there is very careful work done, very valuable and thoughtful experimentation, always in the background of this work, there are these irrational fashions of what is believable and what is not. Many things that we accept today were completely unbelievable.
I'm what you would call
We are always coming across this. Authoritative pronouncements that no one will ever reach the moon because of uncontrovertible evidence about this, that, and the other. But nowadays we have swung over perhaps to be a little bit too uncritical. And as Norbert Wiener warned in his book, The Human Use of Human Beings, we must not take science as a sort of fairy godmother. Say, well, we have all these problems of overpopulation and lack of water and so on, but science will solve it, don't worry. So that's the other extreme. But there are these fashions. no noise, no existence. But existence is not only the impact of rocks upon each other. Existence requires, always as its third, you can get the rocks knocking, the sun and the moisture, the tree crashing to the ground, the sun pouring out electrical energy. But none of these things constitute existence until related with the neurological complex. Then you have to look backwards and say at the same time, the neurological complex belongs to the same world as the sun. It's a physical pattern, physical behavior, physical energy. But it takes this complexity of pattern to evoke the world. See, this idea is unfamiliar. And that's the difficulty of understanding it. That's all. It's a very simple idea. But it's an unfamiliar one, and it's an unfashionable one. Although, as I say, this sort of thinking is coming back to us at this time. One gets the perfectly uncanny feeling of the world and oneself as simply two phases of a single process. Well, as the rainbow metaphor illustrated, we arbitrarily favor an explanation of the triangle, the impact of energies in the external world, and an observer of this impact energizes or realizes them, makes them real. The difficulties that we have in our prejudice that it's the two forces out there that are real, and the observer is irrelevant to the reality of the situation. That's what we're really saying. It goes back to the whole notion that man himself is irrelevant. Man is conceived as something, therefore, that is irrelevant in various ways.
Results are all that matters.
He could be said to be irrelevant because he is a spiritual visitor from another world altogether. He could be said to be irrelevant because he's unimportant.
Separates good matters from dead ones.
He makes very little difference to the total universe.
Opportunity
He's very
for
small.
those who wait.
But when you get this kind of thinking, you want to go back and ask, why do people want to believe that man is irrelevant? When you hear today people's comments on that old myth of man as the head of nature, they come back in a very funny way. They say, oh, that's the most conceited point of view. Man is part of nature. Yes. But why is it that the naturalists who think that man is part of nature are always fighting nature? because they don't understand what it means to be the head of nature. Every creature is the head of nature in its turn. And we all take turns, because it's taking turns that makes the world go round.
To every issue, my side.
Every creature in its turn is the head of nature, because each creature creates the world in its own image. And so each creature, as a creator of the world, is man. Man simply means the middle position. This is the whole idea of man.
At least have the decency to die.
The middle way. I wonder often if there's any relationship between guilt and gold. That the love of money is the root of evil.
Those who oppose me.
Very true saying. Because you see, the difference between having a job and having a vocation is that a job is some unpleasant work you do in order to make money,
Those who oppose me get gored.
with the sole purpose of making money.
You are. Those who oppose me get gored. Don't worry, Chris.
And there are plenty of jobs because there is still a certain amount of dirty work that nobody wants to do, and that therefore they will pay someone to do it. There is essentially less and less of that kind of work because of mechanization.
Rudeness must be eradicated.
But if you do a job with the sole purpose of making money, you are absurd. Because if money becomes the goal, and it does when you work that way, you begin increasingly to confuse it with happiness or with pleasure.
Patience isn't aim. It is the virtue.
Yes, one can take a whole handful of crisp dollar bills and practically water your mouth over.
By precision.
But this is as kind of a person who is confused like a Pavlov dog, who salivates on the wrong bell.
Loving will make no difference. Opportunity rewards those who win. They pay me to find problems. Violence is a means to an end.
It goes back, you see, to the ancient guilt that if you don't work, you have no right to eat. That if there are others in the world who don't have enough to eat, you shouldn't enjoy your dinner even though you have no possible means of conveying the food to them.